So, chapter 4 of the book is related to cutoff, and cutoff is one of the ways that people tend to deal with their anxiety. Most of the literature, I think, would describe it as just an extreme form of distancing.
Right.
That we distance to the extreme, and often we think when we cut off that we've resolved the emotional attachment, and really we're even more attached. One of the places that I think I see it most or hear about it most is when a kid grows up in a family and they make statements like, I can't wait to get out of here. I'm going to move as far away from my parents as I possibly can. And they do, and they move away, and yet still there's that emotional connection with the family.
So in the literature, this is an extreme way of dealing with the chronic anxiety.
Right.
And so if I'm learning to define a self, one of the ways that I do that is I just begin to look around and ask myself, are there any relationships, particularly in my family, but it could also be in other places, churches, significant relationship you've had, where the anxiety got so intense that rather than finding a way to work through that you cut off. One of the ways to define a self is to learn somehow to reconnect.
Yeah.
Is that your understanding of what all that is?
Yes, I think so. And it's so easy for us to be a self, to be completely who we are when we're not in the emotional anxiety.
It's like me being at the cynical. I was a great person when I was out there at that retreat center.
I had a woman that I was talking to the other day about her mom and her relationship to her mom. And this is a woman that's in her 50s, and she talked about living for a while in North Carolina, and her mom lives here. And she talked about how easy it was for her when she was in North Carolina to be a self and to be who she wanted to be. And now she's back here, and now the anxiety's risen up, and she can't be herself here, and she's wanting to move back to North Carolina just so she can be a self. And to me, that's a clear picture of the distancing to cut off.
Well, and what I understand the theory to say is that you cut off from your, particularly when it's your family of origin, that you did that because the anxiety was so intense, and that's where you learn these fundamental patterns.
Right.
And the reason we reconnect is in some, I mean, so for me, I would reconnect because I think that it's part of my value as a follower of Jesus that when there's a broken relationship that you do your part to help restore that and reconcile that. But the other reason that you reconnect is because that becomes the practice field where you get to practice being different. I think if I understand the theory clearly, you can make progress on this by learning the theory and practicing in a lot of places. But if you'll go back to the places where your first imprint of how you deal with chronic anxiety got formed, and practice being different there, that's where you're going to make the most progress in all of this.
And yet we don't really want to do it that way. Sometimes people will get excited about, oh, I'm going to go back to my family, I'm going to reconnect. But what's under the surface there is, this time I'm going to get what I needed from them. Or this time they're going to be different.
Right.
And that's just a recipe for disaster. It has to be what you said, I'm going to go back and I'm going to be different.
Well,
there.
and so, that reminds me of something that we all three frequently say. If you are hearing the family systems theory as a new tool for managing and manipulating the people in your life to do what you want them to do, then you're in for a sad mistake.
Right.
I mean, the thing we can promise you is if you change the way you be in relationships, then the relationships are going to change, but they may not change the way that you want them to.
Change the way you want them to.
The reason, I mean, the fundamental thing that's so powerful to me about the family systems theory is it gives me a place to begin asking the question, what kind of person do I want to be? And the thing about following Jesus is that he tells me to love myself, and he tells me to love my neighbor as myself, and then he tells me to love my enemy. Well, for me, those are just, I'm moving down a continuum to more and more and more anxious settings, where the more anxiety there is, the less likely I am to actually live out of my beliefs. Well, if you've cut off from your family of origin, that's a place of really intense anxiety. and to be able to go back and rebuild those relationships so that you get practice in being the kind of person that you want to be in the most anxious settings. You're going to get lots of practice field. I don't know anybody who wakes up in the morning and says, "Give me a little of that."
Right. Right.
I have a story like yours where a woman who came from a family of origin where some really horrible things happened to her.
Right.
So I mean, where actually what I wanted to say to her was, "You get a pass." I know what Jesus says about all this stuff, but you just get a pass because what happened to you is just, it was unspeakable. And to her credit, she said, "No, I don't think so." She said, really, as I understand Jesus and his teachings, I've got to go back and reconcile this relationship. And for me, her story became a story of all the things we've been talking about, where she discovered that her dad was terminally ill, and that created an urgency to get this work done. And so she went and made a visit. And I had done some coaching with her, and she went and made a visit to her mom. Her dad's in the hospital, and she kind of rehearsed some things she wanted to say and how she wanted to be with him. She could never even go into the hospital room. She was so anxious. She came back, and we debriefed that, and what happened, and how could you have done that differently. And the second time, she goes into the hospital room but can't talk. The third time, she actually begins a conversation, and it's in the fourth time of going that she finally has a breakthrough and gets really clear about who she's going to be in that relationship. Well, here's who she wanted to be. What she wanted to do was she wanted to be able to forgive her dad. That's what she wanted. And that's really moving to me.
Yeah.
Because I live in a world where, like I said to you at the beginning, I started from a place of, you get a pass.
Right. Right.
And what happened to her was because she kept practicing and kept getting coaching and kept defining what kind of person she wanted to be, ultimately God did something mysterious in her life that allowed her to forgive her dad before he died.
Right.
And what began to happen was the people who knew her in her life began to say, "What is going on with you?"
Right.
I mean, it was a
Because she was
transforming
different.
experience. She was just visibly different.
Right. And that stirs up two things in me, Jim. One is the enormous courage that it takes
Totally.
to address the cutoffs in our life. And to go back and the concept of being the person that we weren't before.
Right.
When we gave up ourselves. Now we are our person in the midst of that group or that person. The other thing that really stands out for me is she was not responsible for the way anybody else reacted or responded. She wasn't responsible for what her dad did, so it didn't mean that she had to go back and do all that and suddenly they're going to have a lovey-dovey relationship. It simply means she went back, she was who she wanted to be in that relationship, and she then developed the capacity to forgive him. And that's all that was all she was responsible for.
And I think that if you had, well, I know because I was having these conversations, she was not certain that she could get to a place of forgiveness, but that was her value. That was her belief. That was what she wanted to get to, and she recognized that she couldn't get to that place without going.
Yeah.
That she had been for 20 years not going and stuck in a place of unforgiveness.
Couldn't do it in theory.
Couldn't do it in theory. Couldn't do it without being in a relationship.
Right.
And for me, that just becomes a really powerful story.
So, and that is a very powerful story, and that sounds almost overwhelming. So tell me an easier story. Tell me, what I mean by that, tell me a simpler story of reconnecting, Tricia.
I think that for my family, the family I came out of, we are not cut off in the sense that we don't talk to each other. We get together at Christmas, we're nice to each other. But we have my brothers and I have no substantial relationship outside of the bigger family, polite conversation we can talk about. And I would say about a year ago, I thought I was the one that had the idea to change that, but it turned out they were in the same place. You know, I guess we all got to the
That's
same
great.
place in our lives where we wanted something different. And I don't have a miraculous end of the story yet, but I can say that what it seems to look like for me, and I would say for them too, which is a happy surprise, is that we're willing to spend more time together. We're willing to carve out some time. We're about to be together for my parents' 50th anniversary. Which has involved some phone calls, it's involved some, trusting each other with money and decisions, and I have not come in as the older sister. My way of being is to come in as the older sister and tell everybody how it's going to be, and I have deliberately worked on not doing that because I think that's contributed to our cutoff. I don't think they're real impressed by, my idea that I know how it ought to be. And they also, I think, are stepping up and taking responsibility for our relationship, and that's changing over time. And I don't have a happy ending yet, but I think that one of the things I have to manage for myself is my fantasy about what bridging the cutoff is going to be. If my fantasy is that we're all going to get together and they're going to be different this time, then
You've missed the point.
I have completely missed the point.
Right.
That it has to be, we are all going to get together for Mom and Dad's anniversary. That right by itself is a big deal for bridging this cutoff, but I'm the one that's going to be different. And that will be a successful weekend if I am different, whether they are different or not.
Right.
But I kind of have a sense that they might be different too.
Right. And for me, I have a similar experience with my siblings. I come from a pretty large family. And it's simply, for me, going to a deeper place in conversation and being willing to trust them with who I really am.
Yeah.
Because their lives are different than my life. They're at different places than I'm at. And so can I be who I am and even have conversations that would maybe open the door to talk about some of who I am with them? And that helps me reconnect.
Cutoff happens, I think, because we decide I'm not safe in this relationship.
Right.
So I have to cut off to stay safe.
Right.
But one of the things that self-differentiation helps us with is that we realize, unless this person is threatening our life physically, one of the things we realize is that I can come and be myself, and no matter how you react, I'm okay.
Right.
And under those conditions, cutoff is no longer necessary.
Mm-hmm.